we're doing Q&A, that she responds to any questions that are in the chat. But you can also, there at the bottom, there's a box or a button that says Q&A. You can go ahead and put a question there as well. And she'll, when she does the Q&A, she'll pick that up. And again, I'll make sure she's not missing any. So we have a couple sets of eyes everywhere. So let's see. So that being said, I think I'm going to do a quick intro of Nicole, and then we will get started. So Nicole Emma she counts herself an intimacy coach, sex educator, relationship anarchist, and sexual freedom advocate. She is the co-founder of SWOP, the speaker at TEDx Salt Lake City in 2019. And if you haven't seen that, you need to go watch it. And she's the founder of Utah Consent Coalition. She believes that inspiration, passion, and creativity all come from sexual energy, and a block in that energy shows up later in sex, relationships, and even finances. But most importantly, these blocks limit our ability to feel alive and to feel loved, and those are the things that make life worth living. I love that intro of her, and I think it does impact, you know, how we're feeling right now, and those of us who are feeling fear. So I know she's going to talk about that. I'm really excited to hear what she has to say. I'm going to go ahead now and mute my mic and turn the time over to her. If you have any questions for me, or if you're having any continued problems, put that in the chat and I'll try and take care of those as well. So, all right, Nicole, it's all you.
Thank you. I got chills when you said that. I haven't gone through and edited that for a while, and I was like, oh, that's I like that, which is good. The thing right now, right, with everything, the social distancing and quarantine and stuff, our bodies and our psyches, right, operate on a hierarchy of needs. You've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the chakras, these types of things. So although I do spend a lot of my time in the sexuality realm, there's a lot more underneath that's not being addressed right now. And that's why we're here to talk about fear, right? When we have fear, that's the very bottom level there on the hierarchy of feeling secure and safe, right? So we have to address this one before we can move forward and really live, right? And whether that's achieving our goals or finding relationships or healing and these types of things, we always have to start with fear and our security. I want to start by kind of explaining how I got to a place of feeling like I could talk about fear and help other people, right? It started for me when I was accepted to speak at TEDx Salt Lake City. I didn't mean to get it. I was creating a goal for myself to apply within a few years, and I was going through the application process so that I could understand what they were looking for and prepare myself for later. And so I did this as if, you know, scenario, and they accepted me. And I was like, oh, okay, we get to speak at TEDx Salt Lake City now. And my topic is a bit controversial, and it was something that I hadn't spoken about publicly or even with my family and friends. And there was a lot of fear. So as I was processing through this reality of being accepted to speak, it became very clear that I was going to need to address this fear. I knew that I wouldn't be able to walk out on that stage without fear. I knew it would be virtually impossible to eliminate it. And so I decided consciously, intentionally, to create a relationship with fear. And I spent 4 months before TED and, you know, the year it's been after, because now that I'm doing this, I like it. And I like who I am on the other side of all these fears, that I consciously face my fears. I put myself in front of my fears and, you know, sit in them and get to the other side. And I can talk about, you know, those things a little bit more. And it's super synchronous, but my daughter had a run-in with a mosquito yesterday. She's 6. She got a couple mosquito bites. She was really offended. And it's sad to think of it as adorable because it was really uncomfortable for her. But she was like, you know, he didn't even ask me, and this is my body and I'm supposed to be able to choose. And I was like, okay, I'm doing okay. She's got consent down. But she's like, you know, now I'm afraid to go anywhere because there's mosquitoes. And she didn't want to get in the car to go with me to the store. She didn't want to even move from the, you know, house into the car. Even sleeping, she didn't sleep. It took her a long time to fall asleep, but she kept waking up because she was so afraid of mosquitoes coming in and getting her. And I was, at first I was like, you know, this is totally unreasonable that you're afraid of this. There's no mosquitoes in our house, and even when we get bit, you know, it's a tiny little thing. Like, that's life, right? Like, we have to deal with it. And nothing worked. And I went, oh, wait a second, I'm talking about fear tomorrow. What am I going to be talking about in this class? And I actually, when I sat down with her, I kind of reverse engineered a lot of what I talked about. And I came in today and I made some shifts, because the biggest thing for her was understanding that fear is valid, right? And that it's not something we can completely eliminate. So instead of being like, it's unreasonable to be afraid of that, I was like, no, I get it. I've been afraid. And I know how uncomfortable that is. And I also know that it's possible to have fun and do the things that you want to do even when you're afraid. And once I said that, she was like, really? How? And I went, okay, come sit with me, you know? And I sat her with me and we snuggled and I walked through some of the things we're going to walk through today. So that's the context kind of fear. And I have, you know, some slides and some things. The very first thing I want to do, though, I work very much with the body. A lot of what I do and teach and work with and heal is body related. And the things like fear, because it's that base level in the hierarchy, is really anchored in the body. Has a very biological response. And so I want to take us all through a very short little exercise where we get into our bodies. I think it's common that we spend our day up in our heads, or, you know, getting from one thing to another, getting some notes, like whatever it is. I don't want you to be in your head thinking about, you know, taking notes or concepts. I want you in your body first. So if everybody can put your pens and paper down and sit comfortably, take a minute to kind of adjust and fix what you need to fix. Thank you for putting your pen down. If you're comfortable closing your eyes, I'll ask you to close your eyes. If not, that's fine too. I'm going to, because it takes away the outside visual distractions. The first thing I would like you to think about here is a time that you've been really, truly happy and felt really free. It might be when you were a kid, it might be recently, it might be an imaginary scenario of like a goal or something you're working towards, right? A bucket list item. Oh, this waterfall I want to go visit. I want you to think of a time. For me, there was a camping trip I went on, and I remember laying in the hammock with my favorite people, and the weather was perfect, and I was thinking, I think this is the happiest I've ever been. It's something really simple, but I would like you to connect in with that experience with several of your senses, as many as you can. Can you remember what was around you, who you were with? What were the colors? What temperature was it? Was there weather happening? Were there any smells in the air? Did you have any food with you? Maybe just have eaten, sitting down to dinner sometimes is a common one with the family. Can you hear people talking, singing, birds chirping? What does it sound like? Now I want you to anchor this in. We're going to bookmark it. So think of being in your car and you want to save a radio station, and sometimes you just like have to hold the to button down to save that radio station in your stereo so you can recall it quicker, right? I want you to push the button in your mind and save all of these experiences and descriptions and bookmark this moment with all of those senses, right? And just take a minute to breathe it in and feel what you felt in that moment. If there's words or colors that, or phrases or anything associated with that feeling, I want you to add it into that bookmark. Like, I remember the sun, feeling the sun on my skin and being very aware of its warmth. And the sun to me is a very golden light. So I have like a golden hue, like a filter, sparkly filter kind of over this memory when I picture it. Make sure all those things get anchored in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that, we're going to call that our calm, safe space. And we're going to thank it and tell it we're going to come back soon. And open your eyes and come back here to the presentation when you feel ready. Might be a shift. Does anybody not feel ready to move forward yet? If you chat. Okay. Of course, they'd probably have a hard time typing if they weren't back yet. So that was a silly question. That is one little simple tool. I'm going to come back to why we did that. I'm going to talk about fear for a minute. I'm going to come back. But I want you to know you have access to that everywhere you go. No matter what situation you're in, whether it's fear or not, you can access that space by recalling that bookmark or that radio station, right? Hit the button number 2 and come back to it. So we're going to do that in a minute, and I'll show you when that's useful. And it also gets us all very much present and in our bodies, and now it's fun to talk about fear in a place that maybe we aren't going to be living in our fears while we talk about it. I'm going to share a screen here. Let's see. Share, does this work? I have to hit play. Okay, we can see the screen. Okay, what is fear? Now from this point, I have this full screen, so I'm not gonna be following the chat box, but if there's something or Q&A that you'd like to have addressed before, I'll come back to Q&A at the end. But if something feels more time sensitive or urgent, if you don't mind translating those for me, Sarah, I'd appreciate that. So the first thing, obviously defining, right? What is fear? I think we all have an inherent knowledge, we've all felt it. But realistically, the very simple definition is our body's response to a perceived threat. And I could probably shift body to like body and mind, and it's our whole being, right? Our response to a perceived threat. But the key word here is perceived. Now, there are times in our lives we are facing a real threat. At the risk of sounding like I'm minimalizing, because that's not my intention at all, they're far and few between. Our current society, we have a lot of fears that are real and big and valid that maybe aren't imminent threat of life. And when those cases come up, our instincts kick in and we don't have a lot of say or control over it. But the things that I'm going to talk about in this course today will actually help us prime our subconscious and heal some things that might affect how we react in those situations that can help. But the reality is we can't sit there and say, okay, if somebody points a gun at me, this is how I'm going to respond. Like, you don't know, we're just going to do it, right? So the perceived part is something that becomes key in this. As we step through fear, our perceptions are how we shift out of it. Okay, and I'll come to that when we get to the tools. I'm going to do some kind of general stuff here. Fear is two-part, biological and emotional. There's a biological response that happens, right? Our body reacts, we get adrenaline, our eyes focus in, our ears tune in around us, our digestive system stops. This is a very physical response. It's relatively the same almost like across all humans. It comes from evolution, right? Those things are responses in our body that are a reaction in order to increase our chances of survival. If we have adrenaline and we have heightened senses and we shut down the systems that we don't need as much, we're more able to respond. We have greater strength, faster speed if we need to run, these types of things. Again, because that is such a biological response and there's not conscious influence on that, we don't have a lot of control over it, and it's hard to heal how we respond to those things. The emotional response, however, is very subjective. It can be very similar for people that have experienced maybe similar things or have different personality style, similar personality styles. But for the most part, this is very subjective, and it's based on our unique life and our history. And this can come from how we handled stress as a kid, how we watched people, our models, handle stress and fear. Things like, you know, when your children fall and get hurt and they look at you immediately, right? Like, I've seen that and went, he doesn't know if it hurts or not because he wants to see how I react. Like, the physical part is probably there, but he's like, should I fall apart or should I suck it up? You know, and if we respond in a way that's like, oh my gosh, then they panic. But if we're like, oh, whoops, we stubbed our toe, dang it. Do you want me to kiss that toe for you? You know, and they're like, yeah. And then they move through it quicker. So again, these types of responses come from our past. You've heard of fight or flight. You may have heard of freeze and fawn. Fawn tends to be one that's a little bit newer in the psychology community, but is huge. Originally, when this was studied, it was studied with soldiers in, I want to say World War I, but it might be like Vietnam, but it was about that era, and these responses were studied through men and their PTSD, right? Fawn is one that tends to happen a little bit more commonly with women. So once they started broadening the scope of the studies is when they brought fawn in. And just to clarify, fight or flight is our response where we fight back if we feel we're threatened. Flight means we just run or somehow avoid it, right? Freeze is just like a complete stop. Like, okay, I don't know which way to go, so I'm not going to do anything until I have an indicator of what's least threatening. Fawn is similar to like a Stockholm kind of thing, right? You play along. Oh, okay, yeah, no, I totally agree. You do deserve that. Like, you know, playing along to try to, I understand, you know, that's how that works while you're trying to calculate and figure something else out. And that fawn response is something that is hard to recognize in ourselves and from the outside. So I think it's important that we know our personal trauma responses or stress responses to work through it later. But that's a huge can of worms, I guess. Trying to heal through trauma responses takes some time and usually some sort of therapy. So if somebody has questions about their specific situation there, I'll probably handle that if we have time after or offline. I know that there's a question there. I don't see it. Is that something I can come back to, or? Okay. Can be healed. Okay, and I'm going to talk about some things that we can do. This is a high level, so I'm not going to get deep into a lot of these things, but some things that we can start doing now, and then as things come up, you know, we can look into how to go farther with that. So some common fears or types of fear, right? Fear of death. Obviously, that's ingrained in us evolutionarily. Is that a word? Fear of abandonment, rejection is a big one for a lot of people. They want people to like them. And in our society in general, we're taught to appease people's feelings a lot and to be likable. And I think that we're inherently feeding the fear of abandonment and rejection here because we're not using tools for what to do if somebody disagrees with us or somebody has a preference other than who we are, right? Fear of the unknown, failure, loss, making mistakes. I think we've all probably experienced these fears at some point, but I just wanted to put some of the common ones up. And as you look at your fears, you can kind of bring them back to this, like, oh, this is because I'm afraid of somebody rejecting me, or, oh, this is because I'm afraid of making a mistake. And that will help kind of hone in the next steps. What can fear look like? So a lot of times we don't go, oh, I'm afraid, right? What we have are these. And when we can, like, why am I so I cannot figure this thing out. Why am I so confused? Like, it should be simple. Like, oh, maybe I'm avoiding something. Maybe there's something I'm not looking at. Confusion obviously can be legitimately like, I just don't understand this thing, but it can also be a way of avoiding looking at something. And when we're avoiding looking at something, it's generally because there's a fear there. Being too busy is a big one, right? People that book themselves back to back, they never have time for anything. They don't slow down. There are a lot of people that operate at that level. Sometimes people will do that because there's another fear of what that may look like or what may happen in their lives if they slow down or drop the ball somewhere or stop. So that can be a fear response. So a lot of times if you're finding that you're having resistance or you're not able to make something work and you're just like banging your head on the wall, these are the things that we notice, but that comes from fear. And we're going, oh, okay, now I remember that we talked about that, and I'm feeling this need to completely withdraw from everything and hide. That's probably because there's a fear there. So let me figure that out. What am I afraid of here? These are like the red flags. And these are also helpful in someone else. If you see someone else that's doing these things, I think it helps us respond from a place of compassion if we can see that they're probably coming from a place of fear. Like somebody's too needy and clingy and we're like, oh my gosh, they're just needy all the time. It's like, well, maybe they're afraid of something. Maybe they're lonely and they don't want to be alone and feel rejected. And so they're like reaching out too much beyond your comfort level, but trying to satisfy that fear in themselves. And we can approach it differently than like, hey, oh my gosh, you're being needy, to like, are you doing okay? What's going on? Do you want to talk about anything in there? And I think that shifts conversations. So the big question, what else exists? I think this is a big question to think about now. And it's also a big one to carry in your back pocket. As you find yourself in fear, right? So one of these issues from this slide come up and you're like, okay, now this is something I need to look at. One of the things that we can do to shift out of it, or at least see what's going on, is to ask ourselves, what else exists here? A lot of times if we're seeing something as one or the other, there's a filter in place that's keeping out all these other options, and that's from our fear. And then what lies beyond it? What if I was not afraid of this thing? What else exists beyond being afraid of public speaking? What could I do if I wasn't afraid of that? Maybe I could say something to these people that would mean something or change or help somebody, right? And that why becomes bigger than the fear, and then that helps us shift through it. I have a little bit more organization of how to actually step through these things. I'm just kind of going through a high level, and then we'll dig into it a little bit. So cultivating a relationship with fear. I say it this way because I don't think it's realistic to say that we can eliminate fear. We can cope with it, and that feels like a standoff with our fear, right? Like, you stay there and I'll stay here and we're fine, we're coping. And maybe that's not the right context for that, but I feel like when we're cultivating a relationship with it, it's like that ex that's kind of a pain in the ass, pardon my language, but you have to work through things together. Maybe you have a business or a house or some kids. So it's like, the reality is I can fight you, or we can cultivate a relationship that works for everybody. What is it that you need here? What is it that I need here? How do we make this work? And that's what we're going to do with our fear. right? Because fear happens as a message. When we're afraid of something, it's telling us that there's something that we get to look at. There's purpose there. So if I'm afraid of walking out on stage, just to keep that analogy intact, my fear, a lot of it comes from not being perfect. And I feel like I make a mistake, or I trip over something, or I misstate a statistic, or I exclude an important idea or group of people or something, that I'm going to have all this scrutiny and backlash, and therefore everything I've ever done has been invalid. Right? And it sounds ridiculous when we say it, but a lot of times we're not saying it, we're just feeling it, and we're going, oh, fear is uncomfortable, so I'm going to ignore it. But if I can like actually look at that, what is it that you need? What do you, well, I need to feel confident in what I'm presenting, and I need to feel resilient in case there are some mistakes or questions, right? So that's an important message for me. Okay, cool. While I'm writing this and I'm practicing, how can I do this in a way that also addresses that? Because if I just go out and, you know, spit out a bunch of statistics, I may not be addressing those things. So it's important to look at the purpose here. What is my purpose? Well, my purpose is to say something meaningful that may impact somebody somewhere, right? Simple and vague. Doesn't have to be like, my purpose is to, you know, reach this many people. But that, having that goal in place, again, helps us shift through this, right? Fear inventory, I'm going to come back to. I think it's on the next slide. But doing an inventory of our fears ahead of time, right? Before we're actually triggered and afraid, helps us understand our fears, and it minimizes the impact of being afraid. And I totally spelled regularly wrong. So that's good. That's when I added in. Do scary things regularly. Getting used to, I don't want to say desensitizing. I'm not a person that likes to desensitize. I'm very sensitive. I'm very embodied, right? I want to have all those sensations. So I don't want to say just dull the sensation, do all these scary things so you're like, never mind, right? Fear is important and we should feel it, but we want to be accustomed and practiced, like playing a violin, at learning how to process through it when we're afraid. And you can start small. You can start with things that don't have a huge impact in your life. But doing scary things regularly really gives us the confidence to go into the next ones. So one of the things I was terrified of is swimming. And that's silly because a lot of people know how to swim. I never really learned. I don't have a lot of experience. I went snorkeling. I went to Hawaii with my ex-husband, and I went snorkeling, and I was terrified. I'm afraid of not being able to breathe. And this was probably right after TED, I think, but I was in that space of like consciously addressing my fears. And I was like, no, I'm going to do this. You know, no, we don't have to swim. We can do other things. I'm like, no, I want to because I'm afraid of it. And because on the other side of that fear is something that would be awesome. I want to be able to go freaking snorkeling in Hawaii. Like, who doesn't, you know? And so I've had a couple other things along the way that have showed me that sometimes fears aren't crippling. And so we went snorkeling, and it took me a minute, and I got triggered and frustrated, and I figured out that if I hold my mask onto my face, I don't spit it out and go and take in a bunch of water. And so I just held it there. And then I calmed myself down, like, okay, I'm not going to die here. I have air going in and out of my straw tube, and I'm going to be okay. So then, having come out the other side of that, first of all, I had a blast in the end of this thing. But then the next time I was afraid, I was like, you know, this feels like a 9 right now, but when I'm in it, it was like a 4. So this one is probably going to end up being a 4 too. Like, it feels like a 9 because I have all these experiences and stories, but when it comes down to it, it's probably not going to be that bad. And that gives me a little more confidence and courage to move into the next one. So doing scary things regularly is really important. And a lot of times if we're afraid of it, it's probably something that we really ought to do to grow, right? So inviting your demons in for tea. I don't know if you've heard of that analogy. I really like it. There's a story of the Buddha, right? And he's saying that there's a proverb, I guess, about inviting your fear in for tea. And it's that concept of, what is it that you need here? You know, you're valid. What is it that you need? Instead of avoiding and pushing it away, it's like, well, let's figure out what it's looking for and then decide if I can do that or not, right? Maybe I don't do it. I don't address it. Like, I don't think I can do bungee jumping. Like, that's one that I've gone back and forth, like, oh, I really don't want to conquer that fear, but maybe it would be a blast. I don't know. Fear inventory, I told you I was going to come back to. Okay. So outside of this course, we don't have time to do this today, but you can go and you can go, okay, I feel like I have fears in my life that need addressed, or I'm living in a heightened state of fear more than I'd like to, which is a lot right now, right? That anxiety level collectively is a little higher. How do I shift it? A good place to start is to know where your fears are and just sitting down and making a list of them. Just brain dump all your fears. I'm afraid of swimming. I'm afraid of heights. I'm afraid of bungee jumping. I'm terrified of, jumping out of a plane. Like, that's probably the pinnacle for me. But writing them all out and just get them all out. Don't think about why or how silly it may sound, but write them all out. I have a ridiculously irrational fear of taking my kids on a cruise and them falling over the edge. Like, it's so unreasonable, but it's there. And I wrote that down. And then take a break, because usually we're all excited, or do your calm, safe space, right? And come back and look at why. Why am I afraid of that? Well, I'm afraid of losing my children. I think that one's pretty natural and obviously very evolutionary. We don't want to lose our children. The fear of swimming is because I'm afraid of not being able to breathe and not knowing what to do. So then the limiting beliefs are, I'm not going to know how to protect myself enough to keep myself safe, right? And being able to identify those gives us the opportunity to work on them. We know exactly what to work on. Okay, I have a fear that I'm not going to know how to protect myself in the water, and so I probably get to learn some skills. And that can come from a million different places. I can, all online right now. I don't know how to take a swimming class online, but maybe you can learn about how to breathing techniques, or, watch videos on snorkeling or these kinds of things. Learn how to maybe control your breath or slow it down so you can conserve oxygen, these types of things, right? Take a swimming class, all these different things, but it gives you a starting point. Restating the fear, right? So when we say, I'm afraid of not knowing how to protect myself, I can shift that to, I am learning how to protect myself, right? I am learning the skills I need to protect myself when I go swimming. And if we can catch ourselves every time that fear comes and it's like, oh, I don't know if I'm afraid of swimming. Well, but I'm learning the skills I need. That gives us a little bit of a buffer, a workaround, right? I still have a little bit of that ping in my body, but it gives me something to go, okay, I'm working on it. I'm going to be okay. And restating those with your goals and affirmations. I am a competent swimmer, right? And when it feels weird in your body because you don't feel like you're a competent swimmer, your brain will kick in and go, what do I need to do to be a competent swimmer now that I have that belief that I am a competent swimmer? So you're actually like waving the little carrot in front of yourself by shifting that ideology. If you tell yourself that you're afraid and you're not a good swimmer, then you're like, cool, I've decided who I am. And there's no motivation. And we want to restate those with positives. I am, I will, I am learning, I am improving. We don't want to say, I'm not good enough yet, but I will be. Right? We want to say, I am learning, I am improving every day. I am a better swimmer now than I was a year ago. And then thank it. And this sounds silly sometimes, but gratitude is the highest frequency emotion. And a little bit of gratitude can overcome a lot of fear. So if we can shift that fear into gratitude, we can minimize it and diffuse it a lot quicker. So if I have that fear come up and I'm like, thank you for showing me that I want to learn how to swim better. And I want to do the things that I will do when I'm a better swimmer. I want to go snorkeling in Hawaii and all the other places I want to visit. Thank you for showing me that. Maybe I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't felt afraid. And maybe I would have just gone there without having the time in between to learn how to do it better. Right? So that's important. Thank that fear and be like, thank you. Thanks for showing up for me today and helping me out. That's the inviting your demons in for tea, right? Invite your enemies, your fears, whatever, sit down and be like, all right, let's talk it out. What do you want? What do you want from me? Right? Because then it has no hold on you anymore. Crisis management. I don't like that title, and I changed it a couple times, but because it feels so big, but I guess we're talking about scary fear. So this is the one that I said I wanted to come back to, that calm, safe space, right? The other slide, this slide is for works best when we're not in a heightened sense of heightened emotional state, right? We have our neutral, we have our green. When fear comes, we shoot right up into the red zone, this hyper emotional, right? And that can be anger, that can be fear, that can be all kinds of things, sadness, that keep us from thinking rationally. So when we're in our neutral state is where we can think rationally, have ideas, heal things, make progress, learn, right? We can't learn outside of that state. There is also a hypo, and that's like withdrawn and dissociated, right? Addictions, these types of things that just dull everything and block everything out. That's the hypo under here. Fear often is up here. So when we're overstimulated emotionally, it's hard. So that's where we want to be to do this. But what if we're not in our center, right? If fear comes and you're immediately like, oh my gosh, what do I do? This is the steps to go through to get yourself back to neutral. Okay. And the first thing every time that I will tell you in any heightened emotional state that you can do, the first and best thing and easiest to remember, although it's not perfect, is to breathe. We don't always remember it right away. It might take a minute, but breathe. Breathe. When we're afraid or upset, we don't bring in oxygen, and you don't know you're doing it. But if you watch somebody else that is triggered in fear, they're like, right? There's no oxygen. And if we don't get oxygen to our muscles and our brain, we can't move. So the very first thing is always to breathe. And there's a couple different breathing steps that you can do, and you can count numbers, and all those things are helpful especially if you practice it a lot, because then it becomes automatic. But in that moment, you're not going to be going, okay, I'm supposed to breathe in for 7 seconds and out for 6, right? Just breathe. Just stop what you're doing and breathe. And just like as deep as you can, hold it. Take your time breathing out. So you can do like a 4-4, 4 count in, hold for 4, out for 4. Again, don't try to make it exact. Just try to get in the rhythm of taking as much air in as possible. Holding it is good. Let your body take all the oxygen it can out of the air before you exhale it. Take a slow exhale, because again, we want to slow everything down. So when we change our breathing patterns, our body will match it. Our muscles, our mind, our heart rate, everything will match that breath. So you're actually manipulating your body into shifting your heart rate and your thoughts and your automatic fear response, right? And then from there, we can go, okay, I'm breathing. I have oxygen. Now what do I do? Because that now what do I do doesn't happen until we slow our breathing down. So from there, we're like, okay, I have a safe space I can go. Right? I'm afraid. I don't know what to do here. I have a safe space I can go. And this is where we come back to that calm, safe space exercise that we did at the beginning. So I'm going to go to my hammock, right? And I'm going to be like, okay, recall button number 2. I'm breathing slowly. And I have goosebumps, right? I do this enough that just talking about it, my body knows what to do. And it's funny. I'm going to recall all those details I asked you to remember. The golden sunlight, the bright red hammock, the people I was with, how the air felt, the warmth of the sun, the birds chirping and nature sounds. Yours are obviously different, but recall every single one of those that you can think of in that moment. So we're breathing and we're in our calm, safe space, right? And then from there, we're like, okay, what's the feeling I feel when I'm here? I am the happiest I have ever been. Now, I'm not going to lie and say that I'm going to feel the happiest I've ever been right now when I'm triggered in my fear and I'm going to my safe space to calm myself down. But remembering that feeling helps your body bring it back again to some extent. And anything, any of that you can bring back in is going to help you shift out of fear quicker. Right? So then you come back and you're like, okay, I feel calm now. I feel safe now. Ground back where you are, right? And grounding can be as simple as what's around me, right? Because when we do this calm, safe space, I recommended to close your eyes because we want to be in that moment. We're shifting a feeling, now we're coming back to this moment. And to get back to this moment, we can ground, which is tuning into your senses again, but here. What am I feeling? What's going on around me? What does the temperature feel like? Are there bird sounds? Are there, I can look around the room and be like, I love how the lighting hits my mirrors. And I notice that it's quiet, oddly quiet for 4 cats and 2 kids that live in this house. It is insanely quiet. And I'm like, okay, I noticed that. And it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. A lot of therapists will give tools like tune into your 5 senses. I like the senses because I'm body oriented. But sometimes they'll do like mnemonic devices or alphabet, right? Find something that starts with an A. I have an apple, picture of an apple over there. Like I find myself scrambling because I don't naturally work that way. But those are different things that you can do. Or look for colors, something red, something yellow, something green, right? That brings you back to this moment. And then once you're back in this moment, the next step is to look at yourself and your fear response as an observer. So now it's here, right? That process that we went through of breathing, our safe space, and coming back to this moment took that fear and brought it right here. So there's a bubble, and it's still us, it's still ours. This is my fear, but I am not my fear, right? Instead of I am afraid, it's I'm feeling afraid. And that's a way to take that out of our body and be able to look at it and decide what we want to do. When we can, go choose something else around it. But when we're owning it or we're sitting inside of that bubble of fear, we're acting that way. We're acting from fear, and everything we do is from that place. So this is a way to pull that out of our bodies and sit it here and say, okay, what happened? Why am I afraid? What am I feeling? And that's the place that we can start to come back to and say, what really happened here? Well, I was afraid of, I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe your boss is like, hey, we need to talk. Can you call me in an hour? And you're like, oh my gosh, and you're panicking, right? You can come back to observe, okay, I am afraid of losing my job. I'm afraid of having done something wrong that I don't know about. I'm afraid of maybe they're just doing general cutbacks and I'm not gonna be able to support my family, but you can observe it. And that's the key, is taking it out of our bodies and bringing it out here. Then once we have that, we can validate it and be like, okay, that's rational. Based on what happened, that fear has a right to be here. And I'm okay for being afraid. A lot of times we fight our fear because we don't think we're allowed to be afraid. We shouldn't be, right? And that's another limiting beliefs. And we can put fear on our list of fears if you want, because we're not supposed to be afraid, right? Then we get into meta fear, and that's just... But validating it, and that part where I said thank your fears because it brought to your attention things that we get to grow. that we get to do in order to grow, then it validates, like, it's okay to be afraid. When I shifted my language with my daughter from like, this is ridiculous, it's a freaking mosquito, to like, you know what, that's okay to be afraid. Like, you haven't encountered these much, and definitely not recently because the seasons. So it's a newish experience for her again. Like, okay, it's okay to be afraid. And then we can reframe it, right? And that was when I was talking about swimming, and I say, I am learning to be a better swimmer. We can say, uh, reframe her fear into, I don't like mosquitoes, and I like playing outside a lot, right? Because then that gives us actionable ideas. And then it's like, well, then what should I do? I don't like mosquitoes, and it's uncomfortable when I'm bit, and I'm afraid that they're going to bite me without me knowing it. I don't have any control over it. And I love going outside and playing with my friends and doing all the things, and camping and swimming and all the things that we love to go do all the time. So then how do I resolve that gap? And that moves us into action, right? And that's a lot of times we're like, oh, I have to have this big plan. But many times it's just the next thing. What's just the very next thing? Because you get to that next thing, and a lot of times the next thing becomes clear at that point. And that's it. We just do the next thing. And if you can sit down and make a big plan, great. But if you can't, just do the next thing. And the next thing may be as simple as like, well, let's put some bug spray on you, or the anti-itch stuff, the afterbite. Stuff, something like that. The next step, afterbite, cool. Then what's the next one? Well, let's get you some bug spray. And then gratitude, right? Like, thanks for helping me see that I get to be aware of how to take care of my body for my health, because keeping bugs and mosquitoes away from us is better for our health. There can be some risks there. It could just be uncomfortable. We like to be comfortable. But also helping me appreciate how much I value going outside. I value spending this time with my friends and my family and doing these activities. And maybe I didn't realize how much I appreciated that until the thought of not being able to go do it anymore came up. So there's that gratitude. Not only am I grateful for the fear, but I'm grateful for the activities that I get to do. And I'm like, okay, so then we shift it. Right? I know that's a lot. There's a lot to unpack. Let me get out of this. There's some comments in the chat here. I don't know if you guys are anywhere on the same energetic level I am. It's like, okay, hold on. But if you have questions or comments or something specific, feel free to shoot those in. I've heard of fawn. Okay, cool. Never heard of fawn, I mean. Yeah, I'm a fawner too. That one hit me hard. I went to a workshop where we were talking about consent when I first started the Consent Coalition. And that was one of the big things, is recognizing other people's trauma responses. And we spent, I think, 2 full hours of this workshop on fawning. And I went back through my life experiences and I was like, that's what I was doing. Why did I not know? Because I just kept shaming myself, like, well, why did you go along with it then? Why didn't you walk away? Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you speak up for yourself? Like, you're so weak. You're so dumb. And I was like, no, I was fawning. That was my trauma response. And then I like, okay, why do I do that? How to move through it. It's crazy. I haven't looked at Q&A. Is there anything in there? No questions. And we're right at 5 even.
There's a new question in Savannah just asked in the chat.
Is fawn a common thing therapists know how to work with? I would like to think so, but I imagine that there might be some that don't. As far as I know, they're teaching it as part of the same curriculum with the fight and flight. But I mean, these things take a minute to kind of infiltrate. The idea of like codependency, right, is something that came about, I want to say like 20 years ago, and it's just barely becoming common language. So it may or may not be. And if it's something that you find that you're doing and you want to work through, I would clarify with your therapist that they know what that is, or find one that is familiar with how fawning works. But I would say probably a 80%, 75, 80% chance that they do, in my experience. I think a lot of them try to stay pretty relevant with studies and publications and stuff too. So, did the activity thing work? Does anyone have any challenges or blocks with that? I'll come right to your question there, Lay. So if anyone got stuck in there, let me know, and I'm going to come to this question, then I can come back to that. How do you use this knowledge in your work with your clients? Oh, goodness. All the time. A lot of what I work with is either traumas or subconscious stories that are stuck, that keep people from feeling free and relaxed, right? So if I'm working through, for example, a woman that's probably, I want to say she's mid-40s, came to me and was saying, I had a sexual abuse in my childhood. I've worked through this in therapy for 20 years, but every time my partner touches me, I cringe. My body just goes like this, right? And again, I'm a body worker, and I was like, okay, let's work through it. And the hierarchy of needs, right? Sexuality and connection and relationship are above safety. So if you do not feel safe and you don't know how to feel safe, and you are in that place of, like my swimming example, right? I don't know how to keep myself safe here. I don't have the tools to know how to keep myself safe when I'm swimming. Then I'm going to go in the water and be stuck the whole time. Like I may swim and I may paddle a bit, but as soon as a little wave comes over, and this is exactly what happened, I got really triggered before I stepped away and then worked through it. The wave kept coming in and getting in my tube, and I was like, I can't do this, because I'm panicking the whole time. Like I took my thing out and I chucked it, right? I was like, I'm not swimming anymore. But that's the point. Like those are the things that keep us stuck. So when this person came to me and they're like, I want to have more intimacy with my partner, I want to have more desire and passion and feel more comfortable physically and not have to shift out of this every single time, we came back to this, right? It's how to, instead of eliminating those fears, how to invite them into tea, right? What do you want? What are you asking me to do right now? And what we ended up doing in that case was learning how to shift those things ahead of time or throughout the day, so that if at the point where the partner may be like, hi, what do you want to do after dinner? Maybe we can have some fun time. It wasn't a new concept, right? You don't get your whole to-do list in and then all of a sudden be like, ooh, do I want to play or not? Because now I have this thing come up. It was like touching them and connecting with them throughout the day in order to help kind of work through that fear. And that's obviously a super brief version of it. But again, it's at the root of everything. Everything that we do comes from fear or love, right? So the stuff that we're not doing from our center and our love for ourselves or other people, as it may be, is coming from some sort of fear somewhere. So it always will come back to this.
So the slide that was super interesting for me was what fear can look like. I've never thought of those things as being fear, but when that happens, it became very clear as I was reading that, going, oh, that answers so many questions. I'd never heard of that concept. I've never, thought of some of these things being fear looking at me in a different way, whether it was resistance or what else did I write down? Confusion, being busy, all of those super interesting. And that was I don't know if you have more insights on that, but that was new to me. I'm really going to have to process through some of those. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. The trick with those is it can look different for different, not only different people, it looks different for you than it does for me, but it'll look different for me with different fears and different circumstances, and different people. So when I go to my parents, they live out of state, my coping, these are coping mechanisms we're talking about, right? My coping mechanisms look different in that environment than they do here. And, something like being overwhelmed, again, I'm pretty sensitive and they're very loud, and usually angry when they don't have a reason to be. They just yell at each other all the time. And I just retreat, right? I disconnect and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go up to my room and read or something for a little bit. I'll see you guys in a little bit. And I get up there and I'm just sitting in the room like I can't even read, right? I'm just like, they are doing all these things to me, right? So I get victim-y. They're doing all this stuff. I can't believe that they're shifting it. I can't believe that they're doing, talking this way. And, my kids are here and I blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, first of all, why would I expect anything different? They've been this way my whole life. I knew what I was getting into. That doesn't mean that I have to just suck it up, but I don't get to play this victim card, right? I put myself in that situation. So why am I doing that? Why am I letting myself feel like a victim? And then that, that comes from those processes of like breathing and bringing this feeling out here and looking at it, because then you're objective, right? Like looking at it and being like, okay, why am I being victim-y about this? And it's like, because I have learned to find my peace and they're upsetting me and I don't know if I can keep it when they do this to me. Or, and probably, I want something better for them. And I'm upset that they continue these patterns that I can see them doing and they can't see it. And I can't get through to them. Right? So then now I can look at those two things. I'm afraid of getting pulled out of my center and my peaceful space against my will, which is really just a call to strengthen my tools, right? Because I'm in control of my emotional space, and I know that, as much as I don't like it sometimes. And then also this idea of benevolence for them. And then I get to decide, is it something I try to approach them with and bring up with them? Is it something I try to let go? How would I approach it if I did? Is there a level at which I need to step away? Whether it's staying in a different place, maybe I make different plans next time. Maybe we get a hotel and we come visit for a while and leave, and but it puts us in that place again of like actionable. Okay, now what?
This has been really good. If I'm going to kind of end this, but if anyone has one last question, quickly throw it in and we'll let Nicole answer that. But otherwise, really, this has been a really good class for me. I hope you guys have gotten something good out of it. It made me laugh when you talked about your fear in Hawaii and swimming, because literally that is my happy place, is snorkeling in Hawaii with the big turtles. And because I am a swimmer, so I feel safe there, I feel good there. But that was funny to me that is was a place of fear, where for me, I don't think it could be happier. So but I think that tells a lot about each of us. We're each going to have individual things that we're responding to. There is one last question from Lay, and then we'll wrap up.
Cool. How do you help your clients release their fears through the body? It's all a process, right? If we're learning to play the violin, we have to practice it. And we can practice a certain score and get really good at that score and shift to another one and realize there's more techniques and skills we don't have. So this is an ongoing thing, is what I'm getting at. It's really easy to take these tools and practice them and use them, but there's going to be points where you're stuck and these aren't working, or they're not sufficient or something. And it's always a learning. All these are messages just to learn more and keep working at it. So if I am getting stuck on some Vivaldi piece, I can really practice that more. Right? So it's not going to be just like, okay, let's get over this fear. Like, I know how to snorkel now, but I haven't done it for a year. And I'd be willing to bet if I got back in that situation, I would probably have that fear come up a little bit again. You know, it's not going to be like this. It's going to be a lot less because I've kind of gone through the process, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to stick my head in. I'm going to hold my freaking mask in again so I don't panic, because I can't stop my panic. But I know that it's not going to last, and I'll just hold it and be like, this is part of my process. This is what I do, right? Hold on. Okay. Okay, we're good. I'm okay. Sorry. Thanks, guys. Let's go. You know, and that's what I work with. Is instead of expecting ourselves to be perfect or to know how to do it or to have something be eliminated, it's living with it. It's cultivating a relationship with it, right? We all have family members that are kind of wacky, and we're just like, that's just how they are, right? We can have that same attitude with our fear, right? That's just how my fear is. Like, it doesn't make sense sometimes, but it's there, and it's like, okay, come on, let's go have fun anyways.
Awesome. Great answer. Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for being here. Nicole does have another class lined up for next week, and there are a couple other classes on the Shift Summit site. We'd love to have you join us for any and all. Thank you for being here. Sorry about the glitch at the start of the class. I'm glad you made it. We'll try and do better next time. And I'll try and figure out what that was. I don't know what happened. But thank you for being here. Have a good day, and good luck with internalizing everything that you learned here today. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye, Nicole.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.